The woman I met at a group blind date was a female doctor who was expected by everyone around her. However, inexperienced and lacking in confidence, she is unable to move her body on the spur of the moment. Being a doctor myself, I decided to step in and assist, so she wouldn't disappoint her friends. My name's Jack, a 32-year-old ER doctor. Even at this age, I've never been the topic of gossip. Sure, I've had relationships, but prioritizing work over everything led to many breakups, with most of my exes complaining I didn't give them enough attention. I realized in my late 20s that maybe I'm more cut out for work than romance. In the beginning, there was some emptiness amidst the rush of marriages and births around me, but now I am able to completely separate myself and struggle daily with work and study in order to save as many patients as possible. My family back home is pretty laid back, so no one really pressures me about marriage. Feeling thankful for the blessed environment I was in, all I could think about was becoming self-sufficient as soon as possible. An old high school buddy of mine invited me to a mixer. To be honest, I wasn't interested and was going to decline, but they were one person short and pleaded for my help, so I reluctantly agreed. It was just a filler spot for their group date, so I planned to make a short appearance and then leave. I left my house without dressing up and headed to the meetup spot. Hey everyone, long time no see. It seemed I was the last to arrive, and seeing old friends after so long put a smile on my face. Becoming an adult meant not seeing these friends as often, so reuniting with them at this group date was a pleasant surprise. Even though I wasn't keen on going initially, that moment of reunion made me glad I came. We caught up with each other with old stories and updates on the way to the restaurant, and it felt like we were back in our college days. I was having such a good time, I almost forgot the main purpose was the group date. We were seated and waited a few minutes for the women to arrive. The men suddenly tensed up as the women entered with a cheerful "nice to meet you." Recalling the silent prayers my friends whispered, hoping for a meaningful encounter as we entered the restaurant, I couldn't help but silently cheer them on. After ordering drinks and making a toast, we started introducing ourselves. I'm Jack. I work in corporate. I had made a prior arrangement with my friends to introduce myself with a different profession. It's not that I'm embarrassed, but explaining I'm a doctor often leads to many questions, and it can be tedious. Hi, I'm Sarah. I work as an internal medicine doctor. I was taken aback to hear that amongst us was a fellow doctor. The seemingly reserved woman ordered a non-alcoholic drink and had her cell phone face up on the table. I also kept my phone out in a similar manner, always on alert for emergency calls, so I could tell that Sarah wasn't lying when she said she's a doctor. My buddies would tell me, "Come on, have a drink for once," but I just smiled and brushed it off. The moment Sarah mentioned she was a doctor, she became the center of attention, getting bombarded with questions. "I'm just a nervous in name only," she answered, looking modest or perhaps a bit apologetic. Yet, Sarah's friends seemed proud to have a doctor in their group, boasting about her as if parents would about their child's profession. I'm a doctor too, but I don't yet feel confident in my abilities, so I often avoid mentioning it in front of strangers. Sarah must have an honest and straightforward personality. I felt a tad sympathetic watching her be praised by her friends for being a female doctor and seeing her respond with a troubled smile. My buddies seemed to be growing fond of Sarah, their gaze fixated on her. Anyone could tell Sarah was beautiful, kind, and gave off a delicate vibe. And her humble demeanor probably made her even more likable. I wasn't drawn to her romantically, but I felt a kinship with her as a fellow doctor. Many female doctors at my workplace were strong-willed, had a high society vibe, and were quite snobbish. My alma mater was a state university in a place like Idaho, but my current hospital is affiliated with a private medical college, so there are many young female doctors. Hearing their conversations, there are a lot of things I don't quite understand. Their values clearly clash with mine, and coming from an average family, I often feel out of place. I've always had difficulty connecting with such women. I sensed none of that vibe from Sarah in front of me. As the night went on and we all loosened up with some drinks, the ambience in the bar suddenly shifted. "Sir, are you okay?" The distress call of the store clerk, followed by the sight of a fallen man just beyond the open door. I immediately stood up and approached the man. I informed the clerk that I'm a doctor and diagnosed him with acute alcohol poisoning, instructing her to call an ambulance. From behind, Sarah, pushed forward by our mixer friends, came toward us, visibly shaken. Clearly not accustomed to such situations, her hands trembled. Taking too long to decide and seemingly on the verge of panicking, I reassured Sarah, "It's okay. I'm actually an emergency doctor. I've been through this many times. Stay calm. Let's first get him into a more comfortable position." I whispered that softly to her. Though surprised, Sarah nodded and followed my directions, turning the man to a safer position. Making sure his clothing wasn't restricting him, I asked the clerk for a blanket to keep him warm. Fortunately, he was still breathing. Basic first aid seemed to suffice as we awaited the ambulance. No matter how many times you face emergencies outside the hospital, you never really get used to it. Thankfully, it wasn't more serious. Looking down with regret, Sarah replied, "I couldn't do anything," tears streaming silently. Earlier at the mixer, she had shared that she's working at a big city hospital. Judging by her age, it seemed she had limited experience. She had graduated top of her class, and it seemed everyone had high expectations of her because of it. Earlier, Sarah had said, struggling, "I can't let everyone down. Saving lives but feeling the need to constantly meet others' expectations. I think that's wrong." But I also understand that it's not solely Sarah's fault that she feels this way. I don't care about titles and rarely talk about my profession. Perhaps because of that, people even say things like, "Oh, right, Jack was a doctor too." They even made such rude remarks. The contrast between me and Sarah. But seeing her cry out of frustration, it moved me too. I remember having a time like that myself, and I knew firsthand just how painful that kind of regret can be. "Sarah, you're really something." After the man was taken away in an ambulance, Sarah hesitantly began to speak to the friends who had rushed over. "I didn't really. Thanks to your precise instructions, he was saved." She was about to say she hadn't done anything, and I interrupted her and looked up to meet the surprised eyes of Sarah. Her friends were hugging her, saying, "You did great." Sarah looked at me as if asking why, but I figured she just didn't want to let her friends down. From Sarah's bag, a medical reference book was peeking out. Despite being a newly published edition, it was tattered and full of sticky notes. She must be putting in an immeasurable amount of effort. It might just be me being pretentious, but hard work is always rewarded. That's why I hope she doesn't get disheartened now. There will be many more setbacks in the future. But I thought that right now, she doesn't need to bear the guilt of letting her friends down. And the mixer ended after the incidents during the first round. I was relieved I didn't have to think of an excuse for not attending the second round. As I was about to head home with other things on my mind, a timid-looking Sarah approached me, saying, "Jack, please wait." When I asked her what was up, she bowed and thanked me. "Would you mind sharing your contact information? I'd like to stay connected, both as friends and fellow doctors." She offered her phone, looking expectant, and I couldn't help but find her endearing. "Here's my number." "Thank you." When I displayed my number, Sarah registered it with a happy look. After exchanging contact information, she waved and went back to join her group of friends. The ladies were planning a sleepover and mentioned they were heading out for some shopping. My buddies and I decided to hit a bar we know and have another drink. Being the usual non-drinker, I was sober and stared at my phone screen. I received a message from Sarah. She simply said, "Thank you." I replied simply, "You're welcome," and hit send. It seemed that Sarah wasn't great at communication either. That was the end of our message exchange for the moment. Afterwards, we exchanged messages a few times a week, sharing trivial things like how beautiful the sky looked today or that a flower she was growing had bloomed. In our exchanges, we never made plans to go out, but rather shared random thoughts, forming an oddly comfortable bond. Still, I found our little chats comforting. We both have a lot to learn. We're both busy anyway, both of us needing to practice and learn from experience. Too much communication can be draining. From time to time, I looked forward to messages from Sarah like, "Let's keep it up," or "Good job today." I realized I had feelings for her 6 months after we first met. Sarah was driven by her past experiences, always studying and attending various trainings to become a doctor who can save lives under any circumstances. I had busy days juggling work and studies too, but I always made sure to get enough sleep and took breaks when I needed to. Sarah, always being so hard on herself, seemed to push through without taking much time to rest. Every now and then, when she'd call and share how she had learned something new, I'd feel genuinely impressed and wanted to support her. It's tough, but it's fun. I feel like I'm finally on my path and I want to become better every day. Hearing her laugh while saying those words, I was sure of my feelings for her. I think I had these feelings for a while, but it took me some time to recognize them. Finally acknowledging my feelings, I decided to ask Sarah out. "Sarah, when's your next day off?" "Next Thursday." Luckily, our days off matched, so I smoothly brought up the idea of a date. She happily accepted, and I began planning our date. We'd exchanged messages and calls but hadn't met since the day of our initial encounter. Our second meeting in total. But I had decided that on this date, I'd confess my feelings. I knew we both had busy schedules, and it was uncertain when we could meet next. To make my confession successful, I needed the perfect date plan. Then, one night while on duty, an emergency case came in. I quickly assessed the situation, giving directions to the nurse, and rushed to the emergency entrance. The ambulance arrived, and the emergency patient was brought out. With the patient was Sarah, her white knit stained with blood. A man in his 30s collided with an oncoming vehicle while riding his motorcycle. He was unconscious and in critical condition, so we administered CPR and applied emergency bleeding control. While pushing the stretcher together, Sarah explained the situation and the actions taken. "I understand. I'll take it from here." I immediately went into the treatment room and hurriedly administered care, cleaning and stitching the wound, ensuring no damage to the brain. After contacting the patient's family, I finished the treatment. Thanks to the excellent first aid provided, though the injuries were visible, they weren't critical. When I left the treatment room, waiting there was Sarah. "The first aid treatment you gave was perfect and really helped the patient. The patient's life is in no danger," I said, bowing my head in gratitude. Seemingly relieved, Sarah slumped down, saying, "I'm so glad," and tears of relief flowed. After work, I went shopping and saw an accident outside the supermarket. I didn't know what to do at first, but before I realized it, my body just moved on its own. She was scared, but she said she had been reminding herself of why she had been training all this time. It took great courage for her to identify herself as a doctor. She said if she hadn't stepped in, perhaps nobody else would have. I'm aware of how hard Sarah has worked up to this point. "You did well, Sarah." I gently patted her head. Comforted, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, it's getting late, but I'm almost done with work. Would you like to grab some food? There's a diner nearby that's open till morning." Suggesting a meal after work, I invited Sarah. "I'd love to, actually. I haven't even had dinner yet." Sarah replied immediately, mentioning she had been hungry for a while. She looked embarrassed, holding her stomach, and said she would change out of her blood-stained sweater. She grabbed a bag with spare clothes she happened to have and dashed to the restroom. Watching her run, she seemed more dependable than before. It's hard to imagine, especially when thinking about that day when she was so nervous trying to meet her friends' expectations. Perhaps she's slowly gaining confidence in her medical profession. I threw her a good job, as she disappeared from sight. After wrapping up work, I met Sarah sitting at the lobby, and we headed to a nearby diner. We walked in and took our seats to pick from the menu. I ordered grilled chicken, while Sarah opted for steak and potatoes. Sarah's eyes sparkled as she happily ate the food that arrived shortly afterwards. This place is amazing. Seeing her so pleased, I was glad I brought her here. Before I realized, I was confessing my feelings to her. "Sarah, I like you." Well, she stopped eating, taken aback by the sudden confession. Originally, I had planned to confess during our planned date, a perfect setting I had in mind. I was equally startled, wondering why I had blurted it out now. But what's said is said. Now I had to convey my true feelings. "I admire your hard work, how you always give your best toward your goals. Even the casual texts or the trivial phone calls, I cherish them all." When I told her that Sarah's hard work had saved me many times, she looked down with a blushed face. "This is only our second time meeting, but would you like to date me?" I stood up and reached out my hand. Hesitantly, Sarah took it. "I managed to keep going because of you, Jack. That day, I felt so helpless, yet you helped ensure I didn't let my friend down. I was relieved, but also felt pathetic. But I managed to pull through because of you, even though I can't express it well," she said, taking a deep breath, squeezing my hand tighter. I could feel the intensity of her emotions through her firm grip. To be honest, no words were needed. I could sense the depth of her feelings. "So, I like you too, Jack. If you're okay with someone like me, I'd be grateful." A humble attitude that has not changed since we met. It's so like Sarah, and my affection for her only grows. And just like that, during our second meal together, our relationship began. Despite our busy schedules, we made time for each other, going on numerous dates. Sarah always said she needed more experience and knowledge, pushing herself harder every day. Inspired by her, I've been attending more training sessions and studying every day. I was worried I might make her feel lonely like in my past relationships, but surprisingly, Sarah isn't the type to feel left out easily. We've had a smooth relationship for 2 years now. Even with our busy lives, Sarah is always by my side. The confession plan I had in mind that day didn't work out, but unexpectedly, we ended up being mutually in love. Now, Sarah and I are married and living together. Sarah is expecting a child, adding more joy to our future. Both of us, with our undying passion for our careers, continue to push and inspire each other every day. After her maternity leave, Sarah's considering switching from internal medicine to emergency medicine. I used to immerse myself in work, thinking I wasn't cut out for love, but now, meeting someone with whom I can share happiness and grow together feels like the greatest blessing in life. I'm determined to work hard to protect this happiness in the future.